jesters tipped in whose favor. Our speaker this afternoon is Matt Eubanks. Matt is an active in the civil rights movement. He is now regional coordinator of the Angela Davis Defense Committee, and his office is out of St. Louis. And this regional committee takes in the states of Missouri, Iowa, Kansas, and Southern Illinois. He will speak first on the case of Angela Davis. After the speech, we will have 5 or 10 minutes for questions and answers. Then we will have a film on an interview with Angela Davis. After that, we would like for you, if you so desire, to contribute to the Angela Davis Defense Fund by giving your financial contribution. Then we will move to the Oak Room for an informal wrap after the film. Matt.
Thank you. I want to say that you got everything down that we're supposed to do this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, over this past weekend, people all across this country celebrated the anniversary of the birth of Dr. Martin Luther King. And we of the Angela Davis Committee operating in this region, we feel like there are some things with respect to this celebration and the memory of King that warrants some comments from us that we think have some importance and some significance with respect to the situations in this country today. Those people who were responsible or followers of Dr. Martin Luther King, who either by design or accident or some perhaps insight happened to pick as King's epitaph a particular phrase that I think is very descriptive and self-definitive with respect to the attitudes that those people in power in this country today and from the existence of this country have had with respect to oppressed people, whether they were black, white, Indian, Chicano, Puerto Ricans, oppressed people, period. And that particular phrase was, "Behold, here comes a dreamer. Let us slay him and see what becomes of his dream." And I think those particular words are pretty much descriptive of the kind of challenge that was posed to Dr. Martin Luther King by those racist, fascistic forces, by those oppressing forces in this country through his life. But I think more than that, that challenge is a challenge of the oppressors in this country by that small group of people who happen to control this country, to the oppressed of this country from beginning of this country all the way up through today. I think those words embody that challenge made by oppressors, by those forces against liberty that have been operating in this country since its inception. And I think there are some particular aspects of that challenge that we ought to consider. I think one aspect of that challenge is the reflection of absolute contempt by those who have in fact uttered that challenge down through the history of this country with respect to the rights of the common man, of the average man in this country, irrespective of his color or his national origin. I think we can see that contempt as has been reflected in the bombing of the Birmingham church. I think we can view that contempt as we've seen it in the outright wanton assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. I think we've viewed and witnessed the contempt that those people who are responsible for ruling and running this country have for the rights of people, of human rights, period, not just people within this country. But as we witness the situation that is happening and what is taking place in Cambodia, with respect to what is happening in Laos, with respect to what is happening in Vietnam, with respect to the bombings that are taking place right now today in North Vietnam, we witness, in fact, the contempt that that small group of people who run this country, the contempt that they have for the rights of people not just in this country, for everywhere. And that contempt is further evidenced in what is taking place and what is happening in the case of Angela Davis. Because there has not been, of recent history, a more clear-cut case of the denial of the basic constitutional rights supposedly guaranteed by this Constitution, by the Constitution of this country, to everybody in this country, than what we see happening in the case of Angela Davis. We have a situation where people in this country are supposed to have the right, and not just supposed to have a right, but we have a situation in this country where people have fought and died and bled in all kinds of countries, all over the world, and in this country, whether in reality what they were fighting for was for real or not, is not what is important. It is that they thought, when they moved to fight, when they went to war, that they understood that they were fighting for basic liberties for people in this country. And one of those liberties that we have seen, some 22,000 black men perish, some additional 30,000 whites perish in Vietnam to protect, supposedly protect, and some 220,000 casualties. One of those rights that those people are dying for and suffering for is that right to freedom of political beliefs. And Angela Davis today is in prison, number one, because of the denial of that basic right, because of the contempt that our government has for that basic right, the right to believe what you want to believe. Now, there are people in here, of course, who lived through the 40s and the early 50s. And there are people in here that I know are fully aware from that experience that our government is not only capable of denying people free right to political beliefs, but that it is capable of putting people in electric chairs, in gas chambers, in jailhouses, and running people out of this country in its efforts to deny people the right to free political expression. And those people in here who are knowledgeable can witness on today's scene, who can go back, in fact, to the University of California and understand when Angela Davis' troubles began, and understand that her troubles did not begin at the San Rafael courthouse at the time of the shootout, but will understand that her problems began when she admitted, when she stated openly that she was a member of the Communist Party, when she stated openly that as an American citizen, she had a right, in fact, to believe anything she wanted to believe, when she stated openly that as an American citizen, that she had a right to pick as her choice a party among whose membership you did not have people like Governor Wallace, among whose membership you did not have people like Nixon, like Agnew, like Strom Thurmond, like all of the races that are responsible for the plight, for the oppression, for the serious conditions that our country is forced with today. She said there's an alternative to the Democratic and Republican parties, and my choice is the Communist Party. That was her choice, and she had a right, in fact, to that choice. And we know that that is when her troubles began. That is when her problems began. That is when the move was made to fire her from her job. That is when the move was made to take away the credit for her classes. That is when the move was made to kick her off that university campus. And when people out on that campus stood up and demanded, in fact, that she maintain that job. That is when the problems began. It began around the basic expression on the part of Angela Davis of one of the most basic rights we supposedly have in this country, the right to freedom to give expression to any set of political beliefs we have. And people are not put in jail for giving expression to and not chased out of the country. There's not a whole lot of laws passed with respect to people who believe in the KKK and its philosophy and this and that sort of thing. And neither is there a lot of laws passed with respect to people who believe in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. Both of those parties responsible for the death and maiming and killing of millions of people over in Vietnam. Understand what I'm talking about? The second instance with regard to the contempt, in fact, the expression of contempt for the rights of people in this country, for the basic rights, that is again evinced in the oppression of Angela Davis. We see that again in the guarantee by our Constitution that every individual in this country, again, has a right to receive a fair trial. And key to the right to receive a fair trial is the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. Is a presumption of innocence until proven guilty. And that right, again, with respect to Angela Davis, has been denied. It was denied when the president of this country got on TV and said, along with J. Edgar Hoover, that the arrest of this woman will be a lesson unto all the terrorists out there in this country. That is record. That's down in the newspaper. That's on the TV films. That's everywhere. And when you have an official in our government of the position that Richard M. Nixon happens to occupy, who comes out on national TV and makes that kind of statement, it has some consequence for Angela's ability to receive a fair trial in this country. We have the fact that every judge in Marion County publicly declared that they would not be able to try Angela Davis impartially. That these trained servants, in fact, of the people, who after years and years of training in the best law schools in the country and this and that, and who out of that experience and out of the discipline had managed somehow or another to move themselves to a point where they could rise above subjectivism, they could rise above their own prejudices and everything else, and they could sit down on that bench regardless of what came before them and be totally objective about that situation with regard to the enforcement of the law. Now, those are the trained servants in the community. Those are the people who, by virtue of their profession, are objective. And when those people come out and say that in this instance, the evidence is so overwhelming with respect to the guilt of this woman that we cannot, in this instance, rise above our subjectivity over our prejudices, that we cannot, in fact, be objective in this case. What do you think that says to the average man out there in the street who is not trained, who does not have that experience, who is not expected, in fact, to be objective about this kind of thing? The third aspect, in fact, of the denial, in fact, of Angela's basic rights is the refusal, in fact, to release Angela Davis on bail. In the state of California, there is no law that states that people charged with capital offenses cannot be released on bail. They've had numbers of cases this year. One of the most recent cases occurring about a month and a half ago was the instance in which a dentist, for some reason or another, killed his wife. And he was sitting outside on his steps when the police came. In fact, he called the police and told them that he had offed his old lady for some reason or another, and they took him to jail. And shortly thereafter, he was released from jail on bail. And the reasons the judge gave for it was that this man was still useful, that he was still productive, that he was still had something, in fact, to offer this society. But he was released on bail. In the instance of Angela Davis, the judge out there ordered an investigation, ordered the Marion County Probation Department to investigate Angela and to make a recommendation with respect to her being released on bail. And the Marion County Probation Department made a thorough examination of Angela Davis, covering from the time that she was born up until the time that the judge submitted his request for that investigation. And after that lengthy investigation, they came out with what they said was their highest possible recommendation for bail. Not only did they give her what they call their highest possible recommendation for bail, but they also recommended that that bail be set at $100,000. And when Judge Arneson was presented this recommendation, and a motion for bail was made by Angela's attorneys, Arneson told the lawyers there, and Angela, who was also there, that he had given this thing a lot of thought, that he had did a lot of soul searching with respect to this case, and that he was sorry, but that he had to deny bail for legal reasons. And he was asked, what legal reasons? What legal reasons? And he said, for legal reasons. That's that, legal reasons. And for legal reasons, Angela Davis is set in jail now for 16 months, denied the right to bail, denied the right to a fair trial, denied the right to give free expression to her political beliefs. Let's just look 1 minute at the so-called evidence in this case. You know, Angela Davis is charged with conspiracy. She's charged with murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy to do both. Now, some of these old political professors around here and some of the movement people and some other knowledgeable people who are knowledgeable of conspiracy laws know that conspiracy laws have always and only been used in the instance of political persons whose views happen to be unpopular with the establishment. And that conspiracy is something that is used because you can easily convict somebody on the basis of hearsay, on the basis of whispers over here or whispers over, almost convict them for anything, in fact, under conspiracy. There's been no question that Angela Davis was not guilty of murder. There's been no question that she was not guilty of kidnapping. It ain't never been said, in fact, that she had anything to do directly with the murder or the kidnapping, but that she conspired. And supposedly the evidence is a statement by some clerk in some gun store that some woman who looked like Angela Davis came into his store and bought a gun. Now, this is a black woman who Life magazine and Time, all of them people who collaborated right along with the FBI to create the picture of guilt, to create the picture of hysteria, to create a lynch mob atmosphere in the country. All of those people led us to believe with their articles that this was a very brilliant black woman, and somebody who's very knowledgeable, in fact, of the struggle out there in the community. Now, we know, in fact, that you can pick up pieces out there in the community. You don't have to go to a gun store to get a piece. For $5, $10, $15, $20, $25, you can get any kind of piece you want to get anywhere out there. You don't have to go to a gun store to buy a piece. You don't have to go down to a gun store and take out your identification card, most brilliant black woman in the country, and say, my name is Angela Davis, I want to buy a gun to go down to Marion County to assassinate the judge. You don't have to do that. But they want us to believe that this is the case. Of course, they also want us to believe that they weren't in Laos, last year, and there wasn't going to be no more bombing in Laos. The whole business of being out of Vietnam for a long time ago and everything else, and all the other lies, of course. And I know that people, are too hip today to fall for it. Most people are anyway. But the thing is that with another instance, another facet of that, that so-called evidence. You know that the judge's body was recently exhumed. And they've discovered here, just like people, understand me, were led to believe. I mean, you look at TV accounts, and you got a warden on the TV. You got a guard on the TV. And he's standing here saying, well, I was looking, I saw it. I saw them put the razors to their throat and slash their throat. And all across the country, there's a picture of black men slashing the throats of white guards. You know what I'm talking about? And 2 days later, they come up with the fact that, first of all, the blacks had no guns, and that the guards all died from bullets. You don't understand what I'm talking about? The picture that's presented, I was reading some book by somebody called The Professor, who's hustling some money behind Angela Davis. He's written a book. His face ain't on the front or nothing of that sort, but it's a book called Angela by The Professor. And in that book, he's talking about how the police stood in front of the van. And the van, as it moved toward the policeman, he ducked to the side, got down on his hands and knees with his gun. And then he heard the muffled roar of a shotgun inside. Everybody knew there's one shotgun. That shotgun was tied to the judge's head. You know what I'm talking about? The muffled roar of a shotgun inside. And instinctively, the police reacted. You know, they realized when the shotgun went off that the judge had been killed, and boom, they all start shooting in, you know. Well, the judge's body has been examined, and they find in the inches of the judge's body that the judge was also killed by the bullets fired by the guards, that the judge was not in fact killed by those people inside of the van. Now, we don't have to, I mean, people simply, 1972, I know people come around more and more and more and more and more to understanding the lies and the deceit of our government as it is heaped before us and as it is used consistently to divide the people in this country and to keep us separated along class lines, along racial lines, along ethnic lines, anything, in fact, to keep people divided and keep them apart so that people cannot, in fact, come together to begin to bring about the real significant changes that are needed in this country. There's another aspect to that epitaph that's thrown out with respect to Martin Luther King. There's another aspect of it. And that, again, is a business of perpetuating the myth of invincibility on the part of our government. Invincibility and indestructibility, that it cannot, in fact, be changed. That we're so impotent, and it is so mighty and so powerful that it can't be changed. And this, too, is a part of its policy, This, too, is a part of its attitude toward the people in this country. And it seeks to perpetuate that myth that we cannot change it, that we cannot do this and that, by, in fact, ripping off people like Martin Luther King, When we really come down to the whole question of Angela Davis being in prison, I mean, this is not, sometimes black people now have, in a way, have a certain advantage in not having been like led to, courted the luxury of believing a lot of illusions about this country, about its greatness, about its justice, and all of this business right there. But there's a lot of white folks in the country, too, who, if they just dig back and try and remember and try and think and try and break out of the box that's been set up for them, not just been set up for them, but that they've also been forced into, will understand and remember, in fact, that the struggles that people have won in this country, the basic rights that people got in this country, came through struggle, and that there was always political repression in this country, that there were always forces of evil, if you want to call them that, operating in this country to hold the people down and to back the people up and to create fear and hysteria and panic among the people. They'll remember that. And this has been the case particularly of black people since our existence in this country. The business of wiping out and removing from the scene those people who would step forward and challenge, in fact, those people running this country, those people running this government, those people responsible for the oppression in this country. And their technique has always been one of fear and intimidation, trying to perpetuate in the minds of people out there that it can't be moved. And everybody knows that that myth is collapsing, that is falling apart. And this leads it to a greater desperation, in fact. A greater desperation, because we can see, there's a lot of people, who might be just a little bit slow about picking up on things. But it has got to be clear to everybody about what is happening in Vietnam. That the so-called invincibility of this capitalistic empire here that is so responsible for so much death and so much suffering all around the world, that it is not in fact invincible, that it's not indestructible, as we see what is happening, what is taking place, all with the president going to China after 20 years talking about he'd never want to recognize China, that they didn't even exist, and he's on his hands and knees going, it's got to be because it's collapsing, in fact. That so-called invincibility is collapsing, and people got to be waking up and seeing and understanding what is taking place and what's happening there. And that leads, there's another aspect to that epitaph, or to that statement that's embodied in it. That aspect has to do with, on the part of those people who run this country, a deepening conviction that they ain't gonna be able to hold on to the power they have in this country by playing the kind of games that they played in the past. That they ain't gonna be able to hold on to the power in this country by keeping white people pitted against blacks, and blacks pitted against whites, and Chicanos against Chicanos, blacks against blacks, everybody pitted against each other while they lay back and rip off the profits from that situation, They got to be coming to an understanding that that ripping off like that, and that buying off and that selling off ain't gonna work anymore. They got to be realizing that. They got to realize it because in spite of the level of oppression against people in this country, throughout the ages, progressive forces in this country continue to rally, continue to come together, continue to oppose, in fact, the fascistic policies developing in this country. And people all across this country are speaking out in defense of and in behalf of Angela Davis. And black people, we lost Dr. Martin Luther King in 1968. He was just another one in a long list, in fact, of blacks who were persecuted and literally executed in order to bag people up, in order to scare them and to frighten them off and to intimidate them. And we continue to struggle, continue to oppose the repression and the oppression in this country. And they got to have within them the Nixons and the Agnews and the Reagans and that whole lot of them, and including that Senator Humphrey and the whole group of them, in fact. They got to have somewhere in them a deep understanding that they ain't going to be able to hold on to this power playing the kind of games that they've been playing. They got to know that. And they know that, and they're putting this thing to a test because of that understanding of that. Because I think, if anything is true, it's true that we stand at the crossroads today. And those crossroads is a crossroads between fascism and radical change. Because the problems that we are confronted with in this country today can no longer be satisfied by little piecemeal projects, by giving out a few crumbs here and a few crumbs there, by putting out a job over here and a job over there. It simply cannot be satisfied anymore. The problems cannot be dealt with. You can't go to a city like St. Louis, where almost 90% of the housing are substandard, a city that ain't never had a ride in that city, and a city that nonetheless looks like Germany after the Allied raids and bombings of World War II. And you can't go into that community and build one house at a time. Can't go in there and build one house at a time. Can't go in there and build 10 houses at a time, 20 houses at a time. You got to, in fact, have radical change in this country. And the people have got to bring that change about. And we're not being left much of a choice. We're not being left. Because all around the issue is being forced. Issues being forced. We can see what's happening with the Supreme Court. And people are making no bones about what they're attempting to do with the Supreme Court. Nixon's very proud of himself and what he's doing with that Supreme Court. I mean, it's thrown out everywhere, with some pride, that we're going to stop, in fact, the march to individual rights and individual liberties. We're going to roll back all that business that the Warren Court supposedly carried out and, stacked up, and, for people in this country. We're going to change that. Let's open.
Ain't no bones about wiretapping. There's no bones, in fact, about snooping and surveillance and FBI investigations of people.
And look, they just had a scandal out there at Harvard. I don't know why it was a scandal. I mean, it's public knowledge now that this kind of thing happens all the time. But they just had the scandal out there because one man, a professor out there, wrote a little paper about Rehnquist being seated on the Supreme Court. FBI was out at the campus to investigate him. Do you know what difference that makes? If you're out there on some job somewhere and they come out there and investigate you on the job, just the fact that they're investigating will get you kicked off that job. But they don't make an attempt to hide it anymore. They're just coming right out with it. They're coming out right out with their attack, in fact, on the basic rights of people in this country. They're coming right out with their class attack with respect to people in this country. That is what is involved in the wage price freeze. There ain't been any attack mounted of recency that has more devastation with respect to the rights of working people in this country than that wage price freeze. When you freeze, in fact, the wages of black people out here making $2 an hour, when you freeze the wages of people making $2.25 an hour, when you freeze the wages of people making $2.50 an hour, in a country where the government itself talks about people needing something close to $11,000 a year in order to take care of a wife and 2 children adequately, and you freeze wages out there at that level, you take and you remove forever the rights that workers have won through their fights through the unions to negotiate a contract. You just, with the presidential edict, tear up and destroy, in fact, the whole concept of a contract, so that now you can sit down and negotiate a contract for 10 or 15 or 20% increase, and a company can go along with it, and the collaborationists in the union who are in league with Nixon and that whole group up there, they can go along with it. And then when it comes up to they can all lay back in the cut and wait for the wage price board to do their dirty work for them. That is the level, in fact, and the significance of this attack that's being mounted all across this country against working people in this country, that is mounted against not just blacks, but white people and Chicanos, against every progressive person, individual, or group in this country. That is the basis of the attack on Angela Davis. That's the basis of Angela Davis being in prison. That's the basis of the attack on George Jackson. That's the basis of the assassination and the massacre at Attica. Is to bring about that kind of fear, that kind of intimidation, and to beat back, in fact, the progressive demands and the progressive forces in this country. Now, we have to do some things with regards to meeting, in fact, the challenge that's put before us. And I want to end it with this, because I think that the situation in this country is not a frozen situation. And I think there's 1 or 2 things that we need to understand with respect to this situation. And one is this. Some of us have the illusion that the fight started today, or that it started yesterday, or that the fight for freedom and justice and this and that is a struggle that has only gone on since people got involved around the Vietnamese War, through that whole anti-war action and the activities that came out of that. Some people in here know better. Some people in here know, in fact, that fight and the struggle, in fact, for justice in this country has been going on since people, in fact, came to this country. People know that. People know that struggle has been taking place from the very existence, in fact, of this country. People know, in fact, that the fact that we have had reports that point out the racism among whites and that talk about racism, that those reports don't necessarily tell the whole truth with respect to what is happening in this country. That whereas you might have had racism operating across the length and breadth of this country and from the beginning of this country, you have also had people of all colors in this country fighting from the beginning of this country to put an end to racism in this country and to put an end to injustices in this country. Those people in power would have us, in fact, categorize whole groups of people, would have us, in fact, freeze whole groups of people's in permanent positions so as to keep a permanent split and separation between the progressive people in this country. And we have to remember, too, and I think that whites, more than anybody else, have to be reminded. I was walking through the Teamsters Union building a couple of weeks ago, and inside that building, they've got a brand new, beautiful building. Must be one of them $100 million outfits or operations there that they've got. There's not one picture on the wall anywhere there in that building that depicts the struggle that workers had to go through in order to bring about and bring into being a union. There's nothing, in fact, that tells them at all about that history, because people would not have them understand that history and the relevance of that history for what is happening today. And we find pretty much in the white community that there's not an understanding. And if it operates in the white community, it also operates in the black. That there's not an understanding that you have had, in fact, whites who have given their lives, in fact. There's no question, in fact, about the participation and the role of black people in the struggle. But we are led to believe that there's not been, in fact, whites who have given their lives with respect to moving this country from and closer to a position of full democracy or full democratic rights for everybody in this country. There's not been, in fact, stories told about that and understandings, in fact, passed on so as to generate an understanding and enthusiasm and a responsibility among the current generations to move, in fact, to carry on that tradition. And also to understand that the fact that racism has operated to the extent that it does did not have to do with the fact that we did not have whites who were out there fighting to carry this thing out, but it had to do with the strength of the government and its efforts to put those people in the prisons, to put those people in the gas chambers, to put those people in the electric chairs, to force those people out of employment, and to spread a general fear and intimidation and hysteria in the white community itself. It caused a whole lot of people to back up and to turn around and to go in other ways. But those forces have always been there. They've always been there. Those forces for liberty have always been there. And what has to be done today is that we have to begin, in fact, to move, to bring about a unification between those forces in the white community, those progressive forces in the white community, and the progressive forces in the black community, and the Chicano community, in the American Indian community, in the Puerto Rican community, to bring them to in fact stand up together to begin to challenge the fascist onslaught being carried out by Nixon, Agnew, and that whole clique that we know that's in power today. We also have to understand that the fact that there's no distinction between that Democratic and Republican Party. Everybody in here knows, that the same man that gives Nixon $50,000 his campaign also gives HHH $50,000 for his campaign. They recognize that we have a distinction, Democrat and Republican. but we don't have a difference. And we have to understand that in our efforts, in fact, to move, to bring about some unity, and our efforts, in fact, to establish a basis from which we can begin to roll back, again, this fascist onslaught. The other thing is that, more than anything else, I think today, that we have to begin to make an effort at that point that is most crucial in this society, and that is at the point of production. That is in the shops and the factories with those people that are out there working those jobs, those people that are responsible, in fact, for the creation of wealth in this country, those people who, by fact of their position in the economy, are most able to force and to bring about changes in this country. We have, for instance, within the black community itself, 33% of the workers in the basic industries of this country are black. 33%. If those 33% could pull themselves together in conjunction with progressive whites in that working force, our sister Angela Davis could be gotten out of jail tomorrow. Finally, with respect to the bridging and the effort, in fact, to unite and to begin to build some sort of unity, I'd like to ask people to rise above, in fact, the issue of Angela's political beliefs and to confront what happens to be the only real issues in this case. You know, universal principles for people in this country. The right for one, in fact, to hold any set of political beliefs that he chooses to. The right for a person in this country to receive a fair trial, and the legal right for bail. And I'd like to ask people in this room to join with thousands of people around this country, to join with millions of people around the world who see the issue to be just that. When you go to France and 81,000 people come out in a rally and in a demonstration in support of Angela Davis, and when you go to Rome and some 41,000 people come out in demonstration calling for the freedom of Angela Davis, when you go all over Europe, when you go to Eastern Europe, of course, Eastern Europe, if nowhere else, all kinds of support. And when you travel to Asia, when you travel to Africa, and when you travel to Latin America and see the millions of people, in fact, who are standing up and asking demanding, in fact, that Angela Davis be free, it ought to be clear to us what our responsibility is here. That we've all, in fact, got to get behind this scene. That we've all got to see, there's no way in 1972, there's no way after all of the lies and the tales and everything else by this government, that we can have people who fail to see that Angela Davis is being railroaded, and that the railroading of Angela Davis is a railroading of all of us. Thank you. We have the film here, and while you about ready to show that, Angela, who is she? That's an interview that was taken in the woman's detention center in New York City when she was first arrested. The film, you know, of course, you can't take cameras inside of the jailhouse, so that what they did was to get a tape in there and use that, you know, tape to get the interview, and there's some other pictures that are thrown in for background. I also want to remind people that with respect to making some sort of contribution, that is very necessary. There are very high, exorbitant legal fees with respect to, you know, defending Angela Davis. There's also the political work that has to be carried out with respect to educating people and bringing the issues to people as to what's involved in that case and trying to get that support. So if people pass something to you, if it's in the dark or this or that, please, you know, contribute generously to the effort. And thank you again. that's been established from the very beginning with respect to some of the things that she's talked about here with respect to her job, the threats on her life, the efforts of fire. You know, we're talking about a pattern all the way down the line that points out and makes it clear, you know, what's happening in her case. Now, the probation department took all of those factors into consideration, took into consideration the fact that Angela Davis had fled, you know, but that's like even taking all of that into consideration and examining Angela Davis' record, never in fact convicted, you know, before, never arrested, yes, once before, on some misdemeanor with regards to participating in an anti-war demonstration, but no previous criminal record, you know. All the way, you know, there's, under the Uniform Bail Act, established in 1966, there's some criteria that they tried to come up with respect to whether or not a person would qualify for bail. And by that criteria, you know, we have the situation where that probation department comes out with a clear recommendation that she be released on bail. We also know that in most instances, the whole business for that probation department carrying out that investigation is because the judge himself doesn't feel like he has the time to make the kind of study that's necessary to come up with information that would allow him to make you know, some valid or reliable decision with respect to that. And in spite of that, you know, and usually acts in on that recommendation. And in spite of that, Angela Davis denied bail. If we just look at the pattern, we have the instance of Lieutenant William Kelly, who's accused of having murdered some 102 people, convicted by his peers of murdering some 26 people. And the President of the United States, on the basis of some 25,000 requests, stepping into his case. His being released on bail with virtually no stipulations. The President intervening to the extent that the public is uncertain today as to whether or not he has any criminal penalties against him at this particular time or not. More recent instance and not to talk about, you know, to say that this is not what should have happened in this case, but more recent instance of a young white woman who drove, in fact, a getaway car in a robbery that was committed, whose father is a California legislator, who participated in a bank robbery wherein 2 people were killed, who drove the getaway car, but who was released on $10,000 bail. We're talking about patterns, you know, and we look at the whole pattern of what's happening in Angela Davis' case from the beginning to the end, and it becomes clear that what is happening in her case is a denial, in fact, of her, you know, that what we have here is outright discrimination, outright political persecution of Angela Davis. Okay, first let me see if anybody else has a question. Yes, she's in Palo Alto now, and the trial is scheduled to begin on January 31st. And you know that with respect to there was a survey taken in California, a private survey by, you know, private firm, in the most liberal county out there, San Francisco. 38% of the people there felt that Angela Davis was guilty. She's been, you know, through the change of venue, the trial was moved. They were trying to get the trial held in San Francisco. Even under those circumstances, felt like that was the best place, in fact, to hold it, in that metropolitan area. But the trial was moved to Palo Alto, to an area where you have almost only about 1% of the population being black. A hotbed, in fact, of the John Birch Society, of, you know, reactionary, in fact, groups in that area, and they don't expect, you know, pretty difficult time for you know, in terms of trying to get any kind of fair trial in that area. But nonetheless, that's where the trial has been scheduled. The other thing is that she was again, you know, refused bail, in spite of the fact that we've collected more than 200,000 signatures around the country from people requesting that Angela Davis be released on bail. And that's not been given any consideration to. So the fight is to move it on from where it is now in California courts on to the United States Supreme Court. And we, of course, don't have much hope that that court is going to act unless we get massive numbers of people demanding, in fact, some justice in this case. No. They've been carrying those signatures from one court level to the next court level, building all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And we hope to have some 1 million signatures by the time it reaches United States Supreme Court. Well, the petitions are addressed, of course, to California law officials, governmental officials, and people are also asked to send letters to, you know, the president and to Governor Reagan. His name is included on the, Reagan is included on the petition. What their plans are with respect to the president, I don't know. I do know that there's a plan to submit, you know, 1 million signatures or something close to that to the United States Supreme Court. I wouldn't be surprised if it's turned down that it doesn't go then to the president. Nixon said himself on TV that he received some 25,000 requests. We've collected, just in the state of Missouri, our committee, for instance, has collected 40,000 signatures. To date, there's been more than 200,000 signatures presented to various courts, you know, in California. You know, Angela and Russell McGee's trials were separated. And that severance was opposed initially by both Angela as well as Russell. But there's some factors and aspects of Russell McGee's case that made it necessary for a severance, you know, to occur. First of all, Russell does not, in fact, want to stand trial for the San Rafael incident at this point. What he is seeking to do, first of all, is to have his earlier conviction overturned, the conviction that put him in prison to begin with. And his strategy was to force this thing to federal courts, and he'd been carrying on a fight for a long time in an effort to carry that to federal courts, so that he did not stand to gain by going on trial with Angela, you know, for that San Rafael thing, and whereas she did not have the fact of prior conviction that she had to challenge, she could only, in fact, take this thing through, you know, stand trial for, you know, what she was charged with. So they had a separation. Right now, Russell McGee is going through the preliminaries. They've had, like I said, the exhumation of the judge's body and the rulings with regards to that. Now, those rulings are going to be very crucial when he eventually comes to trial, when it's shown that these people were killed, in fact, by the guards and policemen who were outside. It's also going to be very important if Russell can demonstrate, as he is seeking to do, that he was unjustly imprisoned, and I believe it was 1963 or 64, on this life term that he's serving now in California prisons. Any other questions? Okay. Well, wait a minute. Before you tell me everything that I'm thinking, I think I've already said out here that political history of this country shows clearly that irrespective of the color of a person, that political people receive, the kind of treatment that Angela Davis is receiving. In 1948 and 1950 and 51 and 54, when great civil rights leaders like HHH, Hubert H. Humphrey, was out campaigning for the civil rights of black people, he was setting up in Congress, doing everything he could to undermine and to cut and to take away the civil liberties of white people, of all people, in fact, in this country, all right? So let's make sure that that's understood. Now, we also have, of course, with regards to black people, a situation that's always compounded by racist attitudes that prevail in this country. Well, now apparently you see some equivalency between the Charles Manson case and what is happening in the instance of Angela Davis. All right. Are you saying that the circumstances, the patterns that were established with respect to Manson over a period of time creates a situation of equivalency with respect to those cases? That is, that you can move down the line and show where you have the governor of the state of California early, long before Charles Manson is charged with murder, campaigning specifically against Charles Manson, campaigning specifically to get him kicked off his job, where you have the state apparatus lined up, long time before, where you have all the threats on his life and everything else, as you did in the instance of Angela Davis, you see. You want to separate out, the Marin County shootout and those charges from the historical developments of the oppression against Angela Davis, and it can't be done. You've got to, in fact, recognize the consistency of actions on the part of the government toward Angela Davis all the way down the line, culminating and ending in her being charged with murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy to do both. Does anyone else have a question? I want to thank all of you for coming out.